Hey Reluctant Preppers, this is showing you just how easy it is to purchase silver without paying any premium over spot price. You just go to sdbullion.com/rp, scroll down and enter the special code to get silver without any premium, and they'll mail it to your mailbox, discreetly packaged. Inside you'll find a beautiful 10-ounce bar of fine silver, and you are able to purchase that and have it and add it to your stack and your collection without paying any premium. And you're supporting Reluctant Preppers along the way. Thanks.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. As always, we are delighted to have this returning guest, Rob Kirby, founder and host of KirbyAnalytics.com. He is a proprietary analyst who comments on the state of the financial markets, the economic situation in the world, precious metals, and the big power moves that are behind them, as well as the geopolitical situation. He's an exposer of truth and a poser of questions that are extremely awkward for people that are in the positions of power. He's here with us once again on Reluctant Preppers to answer both viewer questions as well as ones that we will pose to him. Rob, thanks again for joining us on Reluctant Preppers.
Pleasure to be with you again, Duddigan.
We were just discussing the surreal and dystopic world that we're living in and how it becomes more and more the norm rather than the exception as we watch mainstream media or hear government and high finance positioned sources announcing direction, policy, statements about the real state of affairs. Until it used to be decades until we would get revelations that, oh my gosh, we've been misled all along. The history books had been written wrong, and this is what really happened. We used to find out 20 years or more later there was this cooling off period. I don't know if it was till the people had retired or what it was that used to form the cooling off period. But now we are seeing the cycle shorten and shorten to where it's months, weeks, days, or even hours or less before the statements that are being made are proven blatantly and hyperbolically false. And could you address what in the world is going on here, what evidence you're seeing recently of this dystopic world of whom can you trust and what the official story is versus what the reality is and what we're seeing on these important topics?
Well, as we chatted briefly in the pre-interview, Dunnigan, I was making comment on the news reporting that was conducted by CNN anchor Anderson Cooper within the last 10 days. It was maybe a little over a week ago. Mr. Cooper went on CNN, in prime time, and he made a comment that there was a conspiracy theory afoot on the internet that George Soros was a Nazi sympathizer and had worked with the Nazis during the Second World War. And he said that the conspiracy theory was being touted by Alex Jones of Infowars.com. And I mean, to say that I already didn't have a very high opinion of CNN is an understatement. But for Anderson Cooper to make that statement regarding George Soros, and Anderson Cooper being one of the lead reporters for CBS's 60 Minutes, and I mean I'm of an age that I do remember in the late 1990s watching CBS's 60 Minutes news show and listening to the interview of George Soros admitting that he worked with the Nazis to turn in Jews and help round Jews up. I mean, it just seems, look, and I draw parallels between this and what's going on in the financial world, because reality or anything that you believe that should intuitively be happening in the financial world doesn't occur. The opposite seems to happen. And it's like Anderson Cooper comes out and makes this outrageous, I mean, it's just a complete and utter blatant lie Because I mean, I personally watched the interview in the late '90s of Soros making these admissions, and Alex Jones had nothing to do with any of this, and it's how these people from the mainstream can try to rewrite history or alter history and demonize people who are trying to expose the truth or shine light on travesties. It's beyond brutal, and it is really, it highlights how dystopic our world has become. Our financial world is equally as dystopic. And the dystopia seems to know no bounds. And when you think you've heard it all, it's like, wait till tomorrow. We got something new and a bigger pile of steaming garbage, to serve you tomorrow.
The disconnection between verifiable fact and this propagated unreality, is it related in your mind to the fact that there's been a general walking away or turning away from natural law? In other words, if everyone can pick their reality, pick their, not my. It's not that I'm right or you're wrong. It's my truth and your truth. Have we lost our ability to have veracity and accuracy in the press and in government and in finance, because of a more fundamental shift of our culture away from the belief that there is an objective truth?
Well, I'm gonna answer that by saying people in power, or the powers that be, as we refer to them, in my view, have created and have committed such atrocities that they are completely married to, and we've gone so far down the rabbit hole that they have a huge amount of difficulty in trying to put things straight, because trying to put things straight would expose last week's lies and last month's lies and last year's lies. And to put this into context, let's talk about, for instance, the Federal Reserve saying that they're gonna raise rates, and they're on a rate tightening bias, and they're going to reduce their balance sheet. I ask people to use some common sense, and I ask people to ponder, if they would, for just a minute. It's one thing for them to claim they're going to raise rates, and realistically, if they do, the first entity that gets the metaphoric bullet in the head is the biggest debtor on the planet, which is the U.S. government. So that would seem to be a dog that doesn't hunt. And then with regard to the Federal Reserve reducing or normalizing its balance sheet, which is well over $4 trillion, exactly who does the Fed believe they're going to be able to liquidate or sell assets on their balance sheet to, unless, of course, the plan is that they're just going to allow all these things to mature and simply not renew some of the stinky debt they have on their books as it matures. But I mean, that will be problematic if you think about it, that will be very problematic for the Fed too, because a lot of this debt that they have on their balance sheet, I think particularly a lot of the mortgage-backed debt that they have on their balance sheet is not very good debt, which is why they ended up with it in the first place. So if it's not performing, how does letting it mature solve your problem? It really doesn't. And the other issue is the traditional financiers of American largesse, namely China, Japan, and Saudi Arabia, seem to have their let's just say their gullets are quite full of U.S. government debt securities, and if the Fed is really going to become a seller of said instruments, who do we expect is going to be buying those? There's really no appetite for this anywhere in the world. So I mean, I put that out there because it's a very logical question to ask. It's sort of like saying if somebody has to store 8 elephants somewhere. If I own a Volkswagen Beetle and I say I'm happy to keep them in my car for you,
Mm-hmm.
like it's really a ridiculous statement, because 8 elephants don't fit inside of a Volkswagen Beetle.
That's a lot of jokes that reminds me of from the 60s. If this inversion of reality and piling bigger whoppers on top of to cover up, we're sticking. That's our story, and we're sticking to it. And you just have to keep doubling down and doubling down and doubling down on that. The common person. What was the quote from Lincoln? You can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. Is like the common person in the end has some sense of reality, has some common sense, and it's becoming more blatant, more just painfully obvious. Some of these things. I mean, you made the comment earlier that if you want to know what's really going to happen, just listen to exactly what they're saying and figure it's just probably about the exact opposite. Are there any more specific examples like that come to mind that people who are in a preparedness mindset should be taking heed of now at this time?
I mean, well, being prepared is always a good idea, and we can reference the extreme weather events that have been experienced in Texas and in Florida and in Puerto Rico. Really, really focus and shine a light on exactly, one major reason or one major category of reasons why you might want to be prepared. But the ravages of the weather, in my view, might look small relative to the ravages of a financial system meltdown should one occur. And and people, if they want to pretend that can never happen, are more than welcome to continue, whistling past the graveyard if that's what they choose to do. But I mean, recently we've had the IMF point out that there's, I believe it was nine banks that are systemically important, that if any one of them were to encounter difficulties, the rest could fall like dominoes. Personally, myself having experience working as a broker in the international financial markets and the capital markets, I'm very aware of how intertwined banks are in the financial instruments that they trade amongst each other. And I can think of an awful lot of banks, frankly, a lot more than 9, that if any one of them encountered real difficulties, it could cause a chain reaction in a great number of very, very familiar names in the banking community. So, it just makes intuitive sense to have some degree of preparedness, just as it makes a lot of sense to have car insurance, and just as it makes sense to have fire insurance on your home. And when you have insurance and when you don't have to make a claim on the policy, that's a good thing. Because a lot of people I know get to the point where, because there've been a lot of people who've been very upset and disgruntled with the performance of precious metals over the last 8 or 9 years, or 7 or 8 years, dating back to 2011, roughly, when the metals markets have been basically put in a cage, and their prices have been on lockdown, violently suppressed by the powers that be, central banking, and the U.S. Treasury, who who have everything to lose if precious metals prices were to get out of their box. And the fact that your house didn't burn down in a given year is no reason to cancel your fire insurance the next year. And speaking to the brutal suppression of the prices of precious metals, I feel it as much as anyone, because I'm a huge believer in ownership of physical precious metal, and it really, in a sense, it hurts to see things like cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin trading the way gold would like to, trading the way silver would like to. So when holders of physical precious metal speak about their pain, I feel it too, because I'm in the same boat. But on the other hand, I would say to people, isn't it amazing the way things trade when they're free to trade, free and clear without suppression? And I would contend that Bitcoin is really nothing but, and the trade that it conducts is really an example and an expression of something that's allowed to trade freely and fairly.
It's interesting because we've heard people making that particular statement for several months now, and in the face of that, now back to the point of the official talking heads, you have when Bitcoin had touched 3,000, and you had the Chinese government shutting down some coin exchanges, and within a day of that, you had Mr. Dimon come out and say he thought it was a fraud and a Ponzi scheme, and then it gets knocked down to 2,000, and we saw another story saying that J.P. Morgan's loading up at those prices, and now it ran up to 6,000, and now you've got Warren Buffett coming out and doubling down today, saying that Bitcoin is a real bubble and you shouldn't touch it, and encourages everyone to stay away. How much of this is official? Words of wisdom from people who are on the inside, know what's going on, and how much of this is, in fact, what you're talking about is the attempt of those who are threatened by this, trying to prevent it from actually catching on.
Jamie Dimon, when he makes comments about Bitcoin, in my view anyway, he's wearing this ignorance on his sleeve, and I'd like to just say, in my opinion, what I've heard Jamie Dimon speak about regarding cryptocurrencies show that he really, really is completely ignorant and absolutely uninformed about what cryptocurrencies are all about, and specifically what blockchain is. So I will leave that aside, because I don't need to go into a rant about Jamie Dimon's rants about cryptocurrencies. And when Warren Buffett speaks of bubbles, I would just suggest that Warren Buffett might be advised to take a look at the U.S. government bond market and the whole slopping fiat mess of a monetary system that we're currently embroiled with, which is showing signs that it's not long for this world, at least through my eyes, because that's where the true bubble is. And I mean, when you look at and when we examine a little more closely Mr. Buffett's a comment regarding Bitcoin being in a bubble, or cryptocurrencies being in a bubble, the adoption rate, like the number of people that actually even know what a cryptocurrency is or who own a cryptocurrency, is, I believe it's less than 1% of the population. And, in my view anyway, cryptocurrencies are going to very likely get turbocharged when we get an adoption rate at around 3%, because it's my belief that once we and this has been modeled out in adoption models of other things as they gain mass appeal, that once you hit an adoption rate of 3%, it's pretty much a lock that you're going to go to 10, which means that the likelihood that these cryptocurrencies or possibly Bitcoin, or maybe it'll be the brother of Bitcoin that isn't yet invented, but these cryptocurrencies are not going away. These cryptocurrencies are going to be with us for a very long time. At least that's my belief. And frankly, it's my belief that Bitcoin could go a lot higher than it is today, dramatically higher than it is today, for the simple reason that it trades in a free market. The bankers who have a great deal of disdain for it have no means to control it, and when people like Jamie Dimon make the comment that Bitcoin can't be worth anything because it's not backed by anything, well, neither is fiat money backed by anything tangible. But the one thing that cryptocurrencies at least have going for them that fiat money doesn't have going for it, we know how many we know how many of a given crypto there are in the world. Like, we know how many Bitcoin there are in existence, and we know that you can't sell a Bitcoin you don't own. And when it comes to fiat money, that Mr. Dimon is a seemingly a big supporter of, we have no conception how many dollars have been created. And frankly, I find the data that's fed to us by the U.S. Federal Reserve regarding monetary aggregates in terms of how much money there is in circulation or stashed away, it's absolutely and utterly false and erroneous reporting, because we've got the likes of Catherine Fitz along with Dr. Mark Skidmore at Michigan State University doing yeoman's work on documenting missing money in two departments of government to the tune of $21 trillion over the last number of years. So, if $21 trillion is missing, where is the $21 trillion? And if you want to think about this conceptually just for a minute, if we assume that $21 trillion is somewhere and hasn't left the planet, what does that do to Federal Reserve reporting regarding monetary aggregates and how much money there is in the system? Makes a mockery of everything. So that's the way I would be inclined to reply to Mr. Dimon when he talks about cryptocurrencies being a fraud. The biggest frauds that I've ever even conceived of in my life are the frauds that are occurring with U.S. government reporting or unaccountable losses of money, where they went out. It's like they went out one night, got drunk, and they came home and they were missing $21 trillion. They don't know where it went. You see, and that's a dog that doesn't hunt. That's just not believable. Speaking of these unknowns, you mentioned in another conversation about the value at risk, or the VAR, and we had Lynette Zhang on talking to us about some of these stress tests that have been done on banks. You mentioned the IMF announcing about the 9 banks at risk, but some of these stress test results came back saying that if banks had their investments go against them by 3 to 4%, they could be in real trouble. But you've talked to me in the past about how the value at risk is something that it tries to give a size and a risk to what the bank is facing, but how is that? Is it even known? Is it, like you just mentioned, if we don't know where the money is, where the currency is, do these banks with all their derivative exposures and everything, do we really even know, and do we have a way of knowing what the real risk is? Well, I'm going to answer that query in the following way. I have known in my days. You see, I used to be an institutional broker of these instruments that get traded in the trillions. the interest rate derivatives, and I've like literally been out for beers with people in the past that are regulators, the people that are supposed to be regulating the banks and keeping watch over the banks when they take on this kind of risk. And I've also been banks. Some of the very biggest trading houses on the planet at one time were my customers. And all I can tell you is that the risk is real, and what the regulators actually know about what they're supposed to be regulating is whatever the banks tell them, and they will admit it after they've had a couple drinks that they have no conception how to measure the risk of these instruments at banks, and they've literally told me straight to my face that they believe whatever the banks tell them because they really don't have any other choice. So you want a splash of cold water in your face. That's what reality is with these banks and these astronomical amounts of let's just say notional risk that they take off balance sheet. And the reason banks have developed models is basically because they were told they had to have models, because they were told that they had to be able to quantify what the risk was. And for the most part, the lion's share of what these banks put on in their derivatives books is basically the handiwork of the U.S. Treasury, or I would contend the handiwork of the U.S. Treasury, with the Exchange Stabilization Fund being the real force behind the trading that gets done by a lot of these banks. So you see, it's my belief, Dunnigan, that U.S. monetary policy is not really and truly set by the Federal Reserve Open Market Committee at all. U.S. monetary policy, in my belief, is done in a back room at the U.S. Treasury in conjunction with or input from people at the Federal Reserve. But the actual horsepower in terms of making rates go up or down is accomplished by the Exchange Stabilization Fund executing interest rate swaps through their prime broker, which is the New York Federal Reserve. So what happens is if they want long-term rates to go down, they can execute interest rate swaps where the New York Fed disseminates the orders from the ESF into the commercial banks, the big five that trade in this, and they can effectively make these big five banks. And the big five would be J.P. Morgan, Citibank, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, and Morgan Stanley, and they can effectively make them buyers, captive buyers of any amount of 3-year to 10-year U.S. government debt that they want to issue at any time. And this has been done over and over and over again, and this is how we got long-term rates down as low as they went in the aftermath of the financial crisis in 2008. And there's another set of instruments they use when they want to get the short-term rates, as in the 3-month, 6-month, and 9-month T-bills down to the ground. And they can achieve that by executing hideous amounts of an instrument called, it's another derivative interest rate instrument called an FRA, where they can actually make banks captive buyers of any amount of treasury bills, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or 1 year. And this is the way they manipulated the curve. And then when they get on one of these programs to smash rates to the ground, the banks who are effectively doing the buying, the captive buyers of the U.S. government debt, have effectively been given an insider's view as to what monetary policy is, because they're the ones actually carrying it out. So it's sort of like they get to bet on the horse they know is going to win the race.
Right.
And that's why these banks never blow up with a 50, 60, 70, 80 trillion dollar derivatives book. If you got wrong-footed just even slightly,
right.
Like if you have a $50 trillion book, and if you're wrong, like on the notional amount, if you had a loss of 1%, you'd wipe out all of your capital. But you see, it's sort of like when you're told before the race begins that horse number 6 is going to win, and how much do you want to bet, and what horse do you want to make your bet on? And this is the reality of how these institutions have been trading since the financial crisis, and it's this kind of chicanery that was actually used to recapitalize Morgan Stanley, who was a dead bank standing at the end of the financial crisis in 2008. And this is literally how they were refinanced and brought back from the dead. So
what you're describing sounds so much like what we were told was the problem that led to the financial collapse of 2008 was this unconstrained and no natural checks and balances of subprime mortgages and things where the rules there wasn't the proper regulations in place, and it just was allowed to just grow out of bounds. And we were told, so we're going to be doing things about that to make sure that this doesn't happen again. But from what you're telling us now and what we've heard from others in the past is there are no realistic ground rules, there are no real controls, and that the risk is unbounded.
Completely. And because they're really all they've really done is they've concentrated the risk in fewer hands, by basically eliminating a bunch of competition, and they've concentrated the risk in a lot fewer hands, and basically we have a system that is more centrally planned and centrally controlled today than we ever have had. And the only thing I would say about central planning is, if you want to know what the real goods are on centrally planned economies or centrally planned edifices, look what happened to the Soviet Union. Central planning is not a winning model. And it never has been. And this by the way is a big chunk of the reason philosophically why the powers that be hate Trump so much, because Trump in his campaigning and what he stands for and what he believes in is returning power to the people, and in terms of governance, he believes in returning a lot of powers back to the states. So he's sort of an anti-central planner and in favor of local and states' rights, and the statists and the central planners that have control of the system are going to fight that tooth and nail, to their life's end.
We have a question relating, since you brought up Trump, about the phenomenon that you've brought up in the past of local sovereignty versus globalism. We've seen the Brexit vote, we've seen the Trump election, we've seen Catalonia battling for independence from Spain. Do you foresee the dominoes are just going to keep falling, and will it really make a difference, or will the powers that be just co-opt and absorb any? I mean, is Brexit really going to play out into fruition? Is Trump really going to have a free enough hand to actually make meaningful changes? Is Catalonia and others who want to break free ever actually going to be permitted to do it? Or is it all just wishful thinking and too little too late?
I think the nationalist forces are an irreversible trend, and they're going to grow. Elections recently in Australia elections recently in Czechoslovakia, Trump or Trump-like people, and I don't even really want to call it Trumpism, because Trump came to power on this wave, and he's a surfer on the wave, and getting rid of Trump isn't going to stop the wave, because Trump is only a surfer on it, and the wave is a movement towards it's a movement away from globalism. It's a movement away from elitism and feudalism to freedom and let's just say more libertarian based pursuits. And this is something that has caught fire, and I see that fire spreading dramatically more as time moves along.
When you talk about what's going on in this dystopic world of finance, where the truth is the opposite of what we're being told, you talked about that you characterize that as a controlled demolition of our financial edifice. And so when does that become an uncontrolled implosion? You mentioned when you appeared recently on financeandliberty.com, which is a sponsor of ours, that with the petrodollar failing, the system won't stay afloat for much longer. You said there it could be days, weeks, or months, but you didn't think it could go on for years. Could you give us your thinking on, so people understand your mind on that?
Well, it's rumored, and I think it's more than rumors. It's actually been written up quite extensively that China will soon have basically the world's going to have a petro yuan in the very near future, and the reason for this is that China is determined to buy crude oil from the people that supply it with crude oil for their own currency instead of dollars. And historically, the world has operated on a petrodollar system, where anybody who wanted to buy crude oil in the Middle East or anywhere in the world had to first have dollars before they could buy the crude oil. And that was all part of the arrangement that was made between Nixon, Kissinger, and the Saudis and OPEC shortly after Nixon closed the gold window back in 1971. Was the emergence of the petrodollar, and the general outline of the agreement with the Saudis at the time was, if you would agree to sell your oil only for dollars, we will guarantee that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia will be protected. And namely, they had the implicit understanding that the U.S. military would be used to protect and safeguard the royal family of Saudi Arabia. Well, you know what? Times have changed, and let's just say the world's changed to an extent that within the last month, it was announced that Saudi Arabia was going to buy arms from Russia, which is almost unthinkable. I mean, under the old petrodollar system, the idea of Saudi Arabia buying arms from Russia it's stunning. And to me it's another signal, or it's sort of taking it's another leg out of the support for the petrodollar system. And to that, I would say, what do we expect next from Saudi Arabia? Are we gonna next hear that Saudi Arabia is indeed selling oil to the Chinese for yuan instead of dollars? And you see, all of these things which are happening or inevitably going to happen are undermining the foundations of the petrodollar system. And these things have been continuing at an alarmingly increasing rate. So the future for the U.S. petrodollar, or for a global petrodollar standard, has never looked shakier than it is right now.
We have a viewer question related. Lane Bulger asks, does Rob see the dollar steadily dying, as Peter Schiff suggests, or the dollar rising, as Jim Rogers sees, before ultimately dying?
Well, let's just say that the U.S. Treasury complex, with all their dark money that they have in the contained in the Exchange Stabilization Fund, which I believe is in the very big many trillions of dark money, they still have the ability to let's just say manipulate markets and make the dollar appear strong. You see, when foreigners step up to the plate to sell U.S. government debt, and when the U.S. continues to sell increasingly larger amounts of debt each year, as the U.S. Official U.S. government debt continues to grow, currently at $20 trillion and growing, they have never had a failed bond auction. And the reason I would contend that they've never had a failed bond auction is because they always have the Exchange Stabilization Fund in the background ready to snap up any amount of bonds that might be being auctioned on a given day or in a given term. They have the ability to marshal the resources of the ESF up to effectively buy their own debt with this dark money. And therefore, the U.S. debt complex has the appearance of being bulletproof, liquid, and deep. And I could just tell you, having worked in the institutional bond markets and in the sovereign bond markets through the years, like, countries from time to time have failed bond auctions. Germany has had failed bond auctions. Canada has had failed bond auctions. Any country that issues debt on occasion can have a failed bond auction. America's never had one. So you see, I liken that a little bit to, and this has been through, we've seen some pretty difficult times in debt markets through the past 3 or 4 decades. To think that there could never be a failed bond auction, a U.S. bond auction, in my view, it's like saying somebody. It's sort of like saying like a batter who I don't know how many bats a major league batter gets in a year. Like, I think it's around 450 or so. And I mean, you're a batting champion in the Major League Baseball. Usually has an average somewhere around 340 or 330. I'm going from memory, but I think I'm probably close to the mark. And I don't think anyone's ever hit 500 for the year. I don't think. But the U.S. government with their bond auctions, like, they bat 950. They bat 1,000. So if you really think that people can bat 1,000, then you know what? Carry on camping, because that's not the way things work in the real world. But you see, perceptions in the sovereign debt markets are a reality. So if you make people believe that there will always be a bid, and if you make people believe, and you see, and by always having a bid for U.S. government debt, even though the biggest holders supposedly of the debt are all sellers, you give the appearance that the currency is strong. But what it really is a cheap parlor trick, because what you really have is a big bag of black or dark money that isn't acknowledged to exist, that you're using to prop up the whole Ponzi scheme. And fiat money, unbacked fiat money, is a Ponzi scheme, which is why this always comes back to why you want to own physical metal. Because physical metal cannot be printed into existence. Physical metal has to be mined out of the Earth's crust. And when unbacked fiat money becomes sufficiently discredited, people return to the historical standards that they know work. And you see, in the case of silver and gold, they have track records, that go back 6,000 years. So it's sort of like in fashion, when something falls out of fashion for a period of time, but then it comes back into fashion, and what's old is new again. And with precious metal, I do believe that the physical precious metals will ultimately stand tall when the fiat monetary regime we're currently living under is sufficiently discredited. And I think that comes, I truly believe I'm going to live to see it. And how fast it comes is a good question. But I would only offer the notion that nobody benefits from complete anarchy. And so it's not like anybody in the world necessarily wants the U.S. dollar system, the U.S. petrodollar system, to collapse into its footprint overnight. But very, very slowly and very methodically, parallel structures have been created and are being created and continue to be created, all, I would have you believe, all in preparation for a day when the dollar is no longer the world's reserve currency. And these processes have been underway for quite some time, and they are continuing. And at some point, we may see some very rude moves that are felt, and probably felt the most in America, and to the detriment of living standards for average Americans.
Well, you're across the border in Canada, but we always ask this now of all of our guests, so I'll ask you as well. It'll be the first time I believe I've had a chance to ask you this, is what is one thing that you've done recently to either increase your preparedness or decrease risk?
Ownership of physical precious metals, to the extent that I can, is something that I live my life by that. And in terms of storable food is another thing. I'm a believer in having, and I probably don't have enough. But I mean, it's always on my mind, and it's I just call it trying to maintain a state of preparedness. And I'm always researching, and I'm always reading, and because I want to have a keen sense of when I might want to, let's just say, really ramp if I need to on short notice.
Well, Rob, I appreciate so much always when you spend this time with us, and our viewers do as well. They flock to your videos, and there's always a very active discussion thread underneath them as well. I appreciate your joining us once again, our Reluctant Preppers, and just thank you for your insights that you've given us that are far outside the realm of most of our common experiences or anything that any of us have been exposed to in any of the education we received. So just truly appreciate your giving us the insights and perspectives that from your experience, sharing that with our audience here on Reluctant Preppers.
And my pleasure being with you, Dunnigan.